Hi everybody, welcome. Just give it a few minutes and let people filter through. Hi everybody, if you're just joining us, if you can stick yourselves on mute while we just get everybody in the door, we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, well, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this session where we'll talk about the Scottish Government's commitment to reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030. Hi everybody, my name is Emma Scott and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at Disability Equality Scotland, and I'm joined today by colleagues from Transport Scotland. Today will be slightly different in that it will be Transport Scotland who are leading you through today's proceedings and the discussions, as this webinar is going to inform their ongoing consultation on this topic. Can I just check before we start though, can everyone hear me okay? Just give me a wave and type okay into the comments box. Great. Let me explain just quickly how today's session will run and how you can interact with us. So today we're in a meeting format, and that means that you have the choice to have your camera on or off, as well as your microphone. Can I ask though that everyone keeps themselves on mute unless you are invited to speak? This just helps us to cut down on any background noise and distractions. Now you can choose to have your camera on or off, but again, can I ask that if you are speaking, you have your camera on, as this helps us in terms of inclusive communication. You'll see that we have some BSL interpreters with us today, so able to see the speakers does help. What would also be helpful is that the name on display on your screen is the name that you registered under and one that we can use to identify you with. So as I said, we do have BSL interpreters with us today. If you do need BSL and haven't told us in advance, then let us know in the chat and we can make sure that we can connect you with an interpreter. We also have live captioning provided today, and if you'd like to see the captions on screen, there's a link in the chat box that you can follow to enable the captions. For anybody using a screen reader, you can also change the alerts that are read out to you, including any new messages in the chat box, which we know can be quite distracting. Any difficulties though, any technical problems using Zoom, just type out the issue you're having in the chat box and we'll try and resolve this for you. We're also recording today's webinar so that we can share the link afterwards. So if you don't want to be recorded, just keep your camera off. And as usual, after our events, you will get a short evaluation survey just to get your feedback to help us improve our future webinars. So let's get started today then. Many of you will have taken part in Disability Equality Scotland's weekly poll on this topic back in February, just when the route map to achieve a 20% reduction in car use was launched. We ran a poll with our members to gather their views on whether the route map would help to achieve any reduction in car use. And at that point, disabled people said that to support any reduction, there would need to be things like better accessible public transport, more accessible infrastructure and accessible amenities in the local area. And these are things that the team at Transport Scotland will pick up on today throughout the session. Today we'll hear from Transport Scotland on Scotland's climate targets and the route map, before we break out into smaller discussion groups And then after a short comfort break that we've scheduled for around 2:20, we'll come back together for some feedback and a question and answer session. But we will aim to finish on time at 3 o'clock. So let me hand straight over to my colleague Flora Ogilvie from the Climate Change Policy team at Transport Scotland, who will take you through today's session. Flora.
Thanks so much, Emma, and thank you to everyone for being with us today. We really appreciate you giving up your time, and it's great to see so many people interested in this topic area. We're also really grateful for those who did respond to the survey that Emma mentioned, and that feedback has been really useful. I'm joined also today by a few other colleagues from Transport Scotland and somebody from the wider climate change team within Scottish Government, and they'll be helping to facilitate the session. I'll let them introduce themselves when they're in the breakout groups facilitating those sessions. But I'm going to hand over first of all to my colleagues Mary and Jeremy to give you a short presentation and tell you about the route map before we get into those breakout sessions for further discussion.
Hi everyone, can I just check that people can see the screen before I start? Yeah. So hi everyone, my name is Mary. I am in the Climate Change Unit of Transport Scotland, and I am going to give a short presentation today to hopefully provide some insight into the route map and address any concerns which were raised in the Disability Equality Scotland poll. On the screen just now is a short contents page which shows that we are going to cover Scotland's climate change targets, some background to the 20% reduction in car kilometres, the fact that this is and then the sustainable travel behaviours and interventions which are found within the route map. So to start, I'm just going to pass over to Jeremy, who is going to cover Scotland's climate change targets.
Sorry, Jeremy, you're on mute at the moment, I think.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry about that, full start. Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy Hanks and I work in climate change in the Scottish Government, and thank you all for coming along today. I just wanted to give a little bit of context from the climate change perspective to the route map before the discussion. So Scotland has set a target to become a net zero nation by 2045. You've probably heard, or many will have heard, of the term net zero. What this means is that the amount of greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere are balanced out by the amount that we're able to remove from the atmosphere, thereby giving a net zero contribution to climate change. We also have very ambitious interim targets. So we want to reduce greenhouse gases by 75% by the year 2030. The targets are incredibly ambitious, so moving towards becoming a net zero nation will require all aspects of the Scottish society to embrace the significant changes that will come and the changes to our lives in order to meet these targets. So how does transport fit in? Well, transport is the latest data tells us that transport is the biggest emitting sector of greenhouse gases, significantly ahead of other big sectors like business, agriculture, and energy supply. Within transport, we know that cars are the biggest emitter, more so than other forms of transport. Now, during the COVID pandemic, car use reduced dramatically, and many people, as a result, noticed the benefits of living in quieter, safer, and less polluted environments. And as we're coming out of lockdown restrictions, some people are continuing these habits, while others not. When climate change will affect everyone in Scotland, we know this, and when people are already vulnerable, climate change can have a compounding effect, worsening overall outcomes, particularly outcomes associated with health and well-being. So to give an example, we know that extreme weather events such as flooding or extreme heat can disproportionately affect those people who are most vulnerable or less able to take action and protect themselves. Again, that is why it's important that everyone is able to embrace the changes and take actions where they can. And just finally, before I pass back, Scotland has committed to a just transition to net zero by 2045. The just transition, it describes the way that we intend to transition to net zero, committing to ensuring a greener, fairer Scotland in a way that is fair and tackles inequalities and leaves no one behind. Mary, I'll pass back to you.
Perfect, thank you. So the reason we're all here is that Scottish Government has a commitment to reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030. We believe that this is a world-leading commitment which demonstrates the level of ambition which is needed for Scotland to achieve net zero. The route map, which sets out how we will achieve this commitment, was published in January of this year in collaboration with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, and it includes not only interventions for transport policy, but wider policy which will support people to live better lives while reducing their need to use cars. This will be done by supporting people to reduce their need to travel, live well locally, switch to walking, wheeling and cycling and public transport, and finally combining or sharing journeys where the car is still necessary. So this slide is titled a National Ambition, and that is because we think it is important to highlight that this route map doesn't aim to eliminate all car use. We recognise that this would not be realistic or fair, and that reducing car use will be more challenging in rural areas to use as a mobility aid or those who have specific business needs. The target is therefore a national target rather than one for all regions or individuals to reduce their car use at the same scale. So this slide is titled why we need change, and for climate. So as Jeremy previously mentioned, we know that transport is Scotland's largest emitting sector, as it accounts for nearly 30% of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions. And within that, car travel makes up nearly 40% of transport emissions, which is reflected in that car is the most dominant mode of transport in Scotland. Although car is the most dominant mode of travel, nearly 30% of households don't have access to a car, and this increases to a private car, and this increases to 60% for households on the lowest of incomes. Data shows us that we need to support people to change their behaviour in relation to a range of journey purposes. So currently, commuting, shopping and leisure are the most common reasons for car travel, and longer trips have big impacts on emissions, with around 4% of trips accounting for nearly 30% of the total mileage driven. For Scotland to meet the commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2045, modelling shows that technology alone will not be enough. We therefore need to do both, reduce the use of private vehicles and ensure that the remaining private vehicle trips transition to lower emission vehicles. So why do we need change for better lives? Although this commitment will help to reduce our emissions and take action against climate change, reducing car use can also provide wider benefits by improving health and well-being and social and economic inclusion for all. We know that a reduction in car use can provide improved air quality, an increase in physical activity for those who are able, a reduction in road collisions, a reduction in noise pollution and community severance, and a reduction in congestion. The negative impacts of car use disproportionately impact those living in more deprived areas, as well as more vulnerable groups like children and old people. And so reducing car use is a key part of Scottish government to reducing inequalities. So we have developed a map for car reduction around a framework of 4 sustainable travel behaviours that we want to support in order for people to reduce their overall car kilometres. On this slide, there's a table which includes the 4 behaviours. In the first column, the first behaviour is shown as reducing the need to travel. This will include making use of digital services, which is a good option to save time and money where there is suitable online options available. The second column has the second sustainable travel behaviour, and this is living well locally. And this would include shortening our journey times and choosing more local destinations. This can help to benefit our local economy and help to revitalise communities. The third sustainable travel behaviour is in the third column on the table, and this is switching modes, so changing your method of transport to a more sustainable method, such as active or public transport. This can help to increase our physical health and mental well-being. And the final sustainable travel behaviour is in the fourth column of the table, and this is combining or sharing car trips. So where car is the only feasible option, planning to share our journeys can save money and provide opportunities to spend time with friends and family. We do recognise that different behaviours will be more feasible in different geographical locations and for individuals with different needs, but we want to highlight that less cars on the road can have benefits for everyone, even those who will continue to use their car due to personal circumstances. This could include quicker journey times for those who use their car as a mobility aid or who need to drive as part of their job due to less congestion on the roads, improved access or quicker journey times for emergency services and other services such as deliveries, quieter and safer roads for those with disabilities, including physical and sensory disabilities, and more pedestrian space in communities due to spaces for people rather than spaces for cars. So this is the final slide for today. As the route map has 30 interventions to support people to adopt the sustainable travel behaviours, which I previously mentioned. On this slide, there is an image which shows boxes with five of the interventions within the route map. And here we have chosen to highlight these interventions as they were identified as areas that would make it possible for you to reduce your car use within the Disability Equality Scotland poll, which you may have completed. So for more accessible public transport, the first image shows that we will invest in the rail network, including in-station facilities and accessibility. And there will also be investment in bus transport, including reallocating road space for buses to reduce congestion and increase reliability. In the second image, it shows that we will roll out a broadband programme which will provide super fast broadband access for 100% of premises to increase accessibility to digital services. The third image addresses the need for more. We have the place-based investment programme, which will provide support to town centres and the delivery of the 20-minute neighbourhoods, and so have the services you need within a 20-minute walk or wheel from your house. For a more accessible environment for walk, inclusion of on-pavement parking, as well as parking at drop curbs and double parking to ensure that pavements are accessible for all. And the final intervention on screen is the Mobility as a Service Investment Fund to support the use of sustainable travel options. And these are just some of the interventions found in the route map, an overview of the steps we are taking to ensure that the route map and the commitment is inclusive. So that is all from the presentation. I hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions, we are going to have time for Q&A at the end of the, after our breakout session, sorry. And we're now going to go into discussion rooms to discuss a few questions. So I'll pass back to Emma just now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maddie, that's helpful. As you said, I think we're just going to go straight into our breakout groups. You've got half an hour and your facilitators will lead you through the discussion, and then we'll come back together very quickly just before we break up for a comfort break at about 2:20. So you should get a little indication on your screen if you're going to, it might take you out into a separate breakout group, and then one group will stay here in the main room. So any minute now, we'll split up into our breakout groups.
So I'm going to go first to the group that Mary was facilitating and ask for some feedback from that group.
Hi everyone. So we had the behaviours reducing the need to travel and living well locally. For reducing the need to travel, for question 1, we highlighted that disabled people already travel a lot less than those without disabilities, and that benefits would depend on the service, the online service. And if services become more digital, this should not impact to reach those services in person, such as accessing healthcare. For question 2, for reducing the need to travel, it was highlighted that more regular, reliable and accessible public transport would mean that some tasks could be done in one journey rather than multiple. It was highlighted that doing a big shop is quite difficult for public transport users. And then for live well locally, for question 1, it was highlighted that service provision just isn't there currently in local areas, and that access to choice could be a disbenefit of living well locally, especially considering affordability of local supermarkets. And then for question 2, for live well locally, we highlighted that improved pavements and routes for walking and wheeling could help to adopt this behaviour, as currently some can be dangerous, and more investment in communities could help make the communities more enjoyable for people to spend time locally.
Thanks, Mary. That's really helpful. And I think there was some overlap between the questions that each group did, and so interesting to hear some of the same things coming up in your group as came up in the second breakout group, which I think Elizabeth is going to feedback on now.
Thanks, Flora. So our two behaviours that our group discussed were living well locally and switching modes. I think overall there was a theme from the group that there's some real differences with rural areas to the central belt, but that there are challenges across the country. In terms of living well locally, the group identified that that can be difficult because sometimes the closest service is not accessible and you have to travel further in order to find an accessible service. The group also noted that there's challenges around the quality of pavements and whether there's a dropped curb where it's needed. So often it's actually the last few feet of the journey which are difficult. In terms of switching modes, the group said that there are real challenges associated with using public transport. They also noted that car sharing could be an option, but it provides less flexibility, for example, if when you can go out is dictated by your pain levels at any one time. So those were the main themes for living well locally and switching modes from our group.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And from the third group, sorry, just let me check who the facility was. Jeremy, are you able to feedback?
Yes, we had some good discussion, and I'll try and do justice here. So our first behaviour was switching modes, so walking, wheeling, cycling, or using public transport as opposed to cars. We talked about the in terms of benefits, the huge health and well-being benefit that can have for everyone getting out and about and more active. Also noting that if people are using less cars, then access to town centres for those with mobility aids or blue badge holders becomes easier, and reduced tension and conflict as a result. In terms of disbenefits or potential opportunities, it was noted that rail travel tends to be a lot more accessible than bus travel because with larger carriages and accessible toilets, etc. But cost and reliability are still barriers for rail travel. Although it was noted that ScotRail coming into public ownership we'll see. And also interesting point on street e-bikes always tend to be in the same format. So there are no kind of scooters or different formats of e-bikes. What could help would be widening consultation to DPOs, disabled people organisations, increased affordability, accessibility and availability of public transport. Particularly, it was noted in rural areas where these are often lifeline services. And on our second behaviour was car sharing or combining. So the benefits there, some overlap with switching modes. The social connection aspect and social interaction is seen as a big benefit. That people don't mind an hour and a half journey if they have someone to talk to rather than an hour journey on their own. So the real social element. Disbenefits could be anxiety or lack of confidence coming out of the COVID pandemic to car share, particularly for the vulnerable. So work with trusted groups is needed to kind of gain this confidence back. Also noting about ambulance services have stopped community transport, resulting in more cars on the road as a result. And what could help would be widening concessionary travel. And it was noted that disabled people or forums have fed back quite a bit on these issues for some time. So again, kind of going back to that evidence base. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's great. And from our final group, Karen?
Yeah, so we also had quite a lot of discussion. First, we talked about car sharing or combining trips, and what was highlighted was, firstly, that's quite challenging for many disabled people, especially since personal cars tend to be kind of tailored to their needs. So unless it's with someone in your family or someone you know, or a car you've used before, it's quite challenging to just share a car or share different journeys. But we also got into a bit more generally on public transportation and other modes, even though that was not strictly our topic. And what was highlighted, that there is a pressing need for accessible public toilets, because when especially disabled people are traveling, and if you have a longer journey and there's no accessible toilets, it doesn't matter if the mode itself is accessible. If it's a 3-hour journey and 1 hour by car, it's easier to take the car. Although it was noted that if kind of everyone in Scotland was better at car sharing, that would make it easier to travel by car for those who need it, less congestion, it would be faster. But we would also have to be mindful that parking spaces, and then especially parking spaces for disabled people, wasn't eliminated, because that's still very integral to getting out and about. Our second topic was reducing the need to travel. So we touched a bit on the 20-minute neighborhood kind of concept, which many in our group noted that doesn't necessarily apply to a lot of disabled people, because the services they need are often quite outside their neighborhood anyway. And also new developments and kind of places to live are built away from the services they need. Talked about if car use was reduced, air quality could be better, which would be a benefit. And also we talked about working from home and how that would aid in reducing car use and kind of inviting participation more generally for a lot of disabled people. Yeah, and the last point was that if car use is reduced generally but kept, or kind of we're mindful that not everyone can reduce their car use, be mindful that disabled people who need a car are not ostracized from kind of are using these like high carbon services, because that's already something we see with stuff like plastic straws, for example. So yeah, I think that was our main points.
Thanks, Karen. That's really helpful and great to see that wide range of comments from the different groups. I think we're absolutely recognise the fact that we don't expect all disabled people to be able to reduce their car use. And I think some of the really great examples that we heard of reasons why that is more challenging are really important for you guys to have shared. But I think also listening to people's views, particularly in my group, there were some people who don't currently have access to a car, and listening to their views on the things that need to be better to help them with their journeys, so that we don't just sort of separate our need to improve things, but actually make sure that things like 20-minute neighbourhoods and the services that are available there are accessible, and that we continue to work on those areas as well, whilst obviously recognising that not everybody will be able to make use of those without access to a car. Thank you so much. All of that feedback will be written up, and we will send a draft report via Disability Equality Scotland to make sure that we have correctly captured what people have said. And there'll be an opportunity for you to review that before it then feeds into our consultation. We've got some time now, though, for a general question and answer session, and myself and other members of the Transport Scotland team are happy to answer questions. We've got Heather Cowan with us now, who is head of the climate change unit within Transport Scotland, so she will also be able to answer some of your questions. We've got some questions that people wrote in advance, but I'm going to take questions from people who are here in person first, and then come to the written questions if we have time. If we don't have time, then we will make sure we provide written responses to those questions as well.
I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, if that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just struggling slightly to see all the hands up. I don't know, Emma, is that something that you're able to facilitate it with, just so that, because I can see one person, Robin, with a hand up, but then I think maybe Billy is also got a question.
I think at the moment, Flora, it's just Robin with his hand up. So,
okay.
Yeah, shall I come in first?
Thanks, Robin.
I'm surprised that more hasn't been said about electric vehicles and the potential benefits of electric vehicles. My next door neighbour has a Nissan Leaf electric car, which says in great big letters on the back, zero emissions. So I'm assuming that the combat to the climate change issues can at least be partially addressed by electric vehicles. And if that's the case, why isn't that part of the emphasis? We've talked about all these other combating measures today. What about electric vehicles?
Thanks, Robin. That's a really great question. Unfortunately, the modelling that we have done shows that because of the really ambitious nature of our climate change target and the timescale that we want to achieve that, if we just promote a switch to electric vehicles, it won't be possible to achieve that target in the timescale. The other issue is all the co-benefits that we see if people do reduce their car use, things like improved air quality, reduced road traffic collisions and injuries, improved physical activity, and reduced congestion. If we just transition from one form of private vehicle to another, we won't be able to gain any of those additional benefits. So it's an important part of the solution, but it's not the only thing that we want to rely on.
I think it's particularly relevant in the context of disabled people, because I would have thought the average disabled person is more likely to be able to drive an electric car than to ride a bike. And at the moment, all the pressure's on cycling, promoting cycling, often at the expense, I might say, of disabled people. So, for example, in Edinburgh, they've rolled out 25 miles of cycle lanes across the city. And that's great for cyclists, but it's 25 miles of barriers for blue badge holders because they can't park their cars. They're not allowed to park their cars on cycle lanes. So, I really do think there should be more emphasis on electric vehicles, maybe not as a total solution, but certainly as a partial solution.
I think we absolutely accept that that's something that is a solution for those who still need their car as mobility aid, and absolutely something that Transport Scotland are looking to support. Thank you. I can see a lot of other hands up now. Billy, I think you were next.
Thank you. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
No problem. My questions are regarding epileptic. Try again, Bill. Electric vehicles and mainly e-scooters, and it's mainly because of the fact that you're not able to hear both an e-scooter and an electric vehicle. Because of that poses a very, very, very very high safety risk for people like myself who are partially sighted. So what more can be done in regards to electric vehicles? What can be done to make them safe so that a partially sighted person like myself knows that there's one coming? And the other thing that I'm going to ask, this is a question, the last for a comment, and this is in regards to bus services. In my area, you're lucky if there's a bus, there's only a bus every hour, and that is it. If you don't get the 2 o'clock bus, your next one's at 3. Don't get your 3 o'clock, next one's at 4. What can Transport Scotland do to ensure that there are regular bus services? Because I've been hearing stories in the news right now that there are a lot of staff shortages across Stagecoach, West Scotland, and various other transport operators. So what can be done?
Thanks, Billy. 2 really good questions. Heather, I'm not sure whether you want to come in on those or whether we need to take those back for more colleagues working on those areas.
I think they're both very good points. I think on the first one, and I thank my colleague John for the information here. So in terms of responsibilities, and this is just background information, safety is reserved to the UK government, but there is information that from July 2019, all manufacturers must install an acoustic sound system in new types of quiet electric and hybrid electric vehicles to improve safety. So I think your point is absolutely recognised, Billy, in terms of the need of electric vehicles to be able to be heard by those that would otherwise be unable to know that they were there. So that's an absolutely important point in terms of the safety of electric vehicles. And then the work on electric scooters, again, DFT has been undertaking trials on electric scooters. So they are illegal to ride at the moment, apart from within the trial areas, but unfortunately they're not illegal to own, which is hence you get quite a bit of illegal use of e-scooters.
If they're illegal to ride, if they're illegal to ride in an area that's not a zone, that's a safe zone, then they should be illegal.
So that they're under the current legislation, they're illegal to ride. So DFT has been undertaking a trial, and so within the trial areas, looking at things like safety, and we understand they're looking at bringing forward regulation in terms of e-scooters, but that safety considerations would play a particular part in that, and would be aware that disability groups would have made representations in terms of, you know, some of the barriers and issues that you raise with regard to e-scooters. And then the kind of broader point on public transport, because of the, you know, the scale of the challenge that Flora outlined, particularly with that 75% emissions reductions by 2030, which is what really pushes the need to look at not just at technology, but to look at all these other more difficult things like reducing car use. That yes, I think your point on public transport, you know, to get the mode shift, we do need a viable public transport system to be an alternative to the private car, as one of the 4 sustainable behaviours that we're talking about in terms of the route map, that mode shift one.
Yeah, we could say, for example, I got...
Billy, is it okay? So I'm so sorry, but is it okay if we take a question from somebody else? And if you have other questions, perhaps pop them in the chat, and then we can see if we can get a response to you in that way. Is that okay?
Yeah,
thank you so much. Ali.
I just wanted to ask whether you're considering the car miles that are racked up because of the lack of investment in social care. Because if I need help, someone has to come from another local authority, and it's just not feasible to do that on public transport. And I'm sure there are plenty of other people in the same situation, you know, and even with elderly care, there's lots of mothers in particular who have to look after children as well as their own parents. And the only way feasibly for them to get around and do all those things is to use a car. So I just wondered if that is factored into the way this is all being worked out, because I feel like the lack of investment in social care is making an impact here, that services aren't delivered by someone who is local, because it's delivered by a family that live far away.
Thanks, Ali. I think that's a really good point. I can't comment on social care specifically, but Scottish Government have an NHS climate emergency and sustainability strategy looking at that issue amongst others from the NHS perspective, and so have priorities within that strategy to look at both reducing the need for people to travel. I appreciate it's different in a social care setting where people need that physical help, but looking at providing online appointments where available, but also looking at the coordination of care to reduce the journeys, so where journeys do have to be physically made, to make sure that those journeys are more efficient and to reduce mileage in that way, as well as, of course, promoting sustainable travel options for those journeys. But happy to pick up with colleagues within Scottish Government in terms of similar plans for looking at social care. Anna, I think you are next.
Sure, just to I suppose add to Robin and Billy's comments, while also acknowledging that any additional car on the road is an extra car, whether it's got an internal combustion engine or is electrically powered. I'm fortunate enough to have an EV. I'm aware that there are more electric cars available through the Motability scheme, but one thing that I've noted is that a lot of the public charging infrastructure, the spaces, are not wheelchair accessible. Also, even at my own workplace, disabled parking spaces are being doubled up as EV charging spaces, so it's actually reducing the number of disabled spaces. And I was wondering if councils and Transport Scotland are working together to make sure that as more and more electric car charging infrastructure is developed and implemented, that the needs of the disabled community are taken into account in the planning of that. They're often very narrow spaces with heavy cables, and you can't always get to the charging port if out and about. So while they are much easier to drive as cars, and they absolutely do help with addressing air pollution issues in urban areas, I feel there are still a significant number of barriers that are perhaps not being addressed as quickly as I feel that they potentially should be.
Thanks, Anna. That's a really important question, and there is work ongoing to look at this. So Transport Scotland's working in partnership with Scottish Enterprise, and there is a project called the Can Do Innovation Challenge, looking at the accessibility of electric vehicle charge points, including consulting with a range of disability stakeholders, including Disability Equality Scotland, so we can provide some more information on that to you. So appreciate it might not be happening fast enough, but that work is happening. Amy.
I have a separate written question in already, but I wanted to ask a different question off of the back of some of the conversations we've had this afternoon. And that is, in my opinion, there's a noticeable difference in the accessibility and ease of application between blue badges and concessionary bus passes. Both of these aids are available with documentation from PIP, for example. But blue badges, in my experience, have much more application options for those of us who are caught in the bureaucratic nightmare that is the DWP. If the Scottish Government wants to get people out of cars and into public transport, they need to make accessing public transport the easier option, including concessionaries for that.
Thanks, Amy. Heather, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Other than agreeing with the point made that it's difficult territory, but yeah, I tried to apply for under 22s for my daughter recently, without being in the DWTP process. I think it's something we're aware of and something that we are working on, but we don't yet have the answers to that today, Amy.
Thanks very much. Susie?
Yeah, in a way I feel I've got to kind of be able to hear me, yeah. Reiterate the dangers of the scooters that are about. It was come up in the branch and the disabilities officer has mentioned it. It's just that sometimes literal speed that they're able to go. They're able to go faster than often somebody can cycle. So they don't have any kind of generally high vis or lights or whatever, often dressed in dark. So they're kind of invisible and going very fast along pavements generally. So they are a danger to anybody on pavements. But, you know, while they are classed as illegal, what is actually being done to go and get those who are illegal off the pavements and roads by Transport Scotland?
Thanks, Susie, and it's a really good point. I don't think it really falls within Transport Scotland's remit. I think it's obviously the enforcement of any illegal behaviour would be a matter for the police. Heather, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add from a enforcement perspective on that.
No, from an enforcement, it would be police, but I don't see high levels of enforcement on this issue. I think I'm aware, I think has been raised here that there is illegal use of e-scooters, and that is ongoing. And I think that's something even with DFT, who is undertaking the trials, and it is within their responsibility to look at this, that the illegal use of e-scooters is actually making it difficult because you've got trial data, but then you've got illegal use of e-scooters ongoing as well. So I think the issues that you raise are probably one of the reasons that DFT are looking at e-scooters, so that they can look at safety and look at regulation, given that the illegal use of e-scooters is such an issue right now.
Thanks, Heather. I think we've just got time for one more question from Claire. If anyone else has had a question they haven't had a chance to ask, if they pop it in the chat, then we can try and answer it separately.
Hi, okay, so I had a couple of points that sort of followed on from other people's things as well. I definitely agree with the concessionary bus pass problem. I've made a point absolutely repeatedly to no avail that the concession add-on on the Transport Scotland website says some of the reasons you might need this would be to push a wheelchair or carry your shopping, and then the requirement that you have to meet to apply for that is a high level of PIP, which assesses your ability to put your clothes on and go to the toilet, not assesses your ability to carry shopping on the bus. So it's a total mismatch in the qualifier and what you get from that qualification. So I've made that point over and over again. It goes nowhere. My question more would be, is there anybody looking at the relationship between the active travel agenda and the services that are provided or not provided by the NHS in terms of suitable wheelchairs for people to use the pavements which exist in their local area, to use the buses which exist in their local area. You know, I have a manual wheelchair which isn't really suitable for going on the bus because it's so light it bounces about in the wheelchair space and I get smacked to death by the time I've arrived. And I have a power wheelchair which I fully funded myself, which won't go round the corner on the more recent buses. So I can't take either wheelchair on the bus, and the NHS just goes, well, we've provided what you need, good luck.
Thanks, Claire. That's a really helpful point. And I'm not sure specifically what is within the NHS sustainability strategy on that, but I know that obviously the NHS have a commitment, I think I mentioned before, about reducing trips, but also to look at supporting sustainable modes for trips. So I can certainly feed back to colleagues who are working on that concerns around the need to support equipment for wheeling as part of that active travel agenda. I think that's a really helpful point. I'm conscious of time and so grateful for everyone who's given up their time today and don't want to keep anybody by running late. So thank you so much for the questions. As I've said before, we will come back to the questions that we received in written format to make sure that answers to those are provided. All of the information that was provided in the discussion groups will be written up and shared with you and will then feed into the consultation. And obviously the final updated document of the route map after all those consultation responses have been considered will be shared as well. But thank you so much to all for giving up your time, and particularly I think a number of people have said that these are points that they repeatedly engaged, so thank you for doing that again if you think that things weren't necessarily heard the first time when they were raised separately. Thank you so much, and thank you to Disability Equality Scotland for hosting us and facilitating this, and to our interpreters and caption writers as well, and all the facilitators. Thank you.